Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. In this video, I'm going to explain to you the concept of an API. So what is an API? Well, API stands for Application Programming Interface. But what the hell does that mean? Well, in tech speak, an API is a set of protocols which dictates how different parts of an application communicate with each other. But a more simple way of putting it is that an API is a way of transferring information from one place to another. You know, when I first got into programming, I always struggled to understand the concept of an API. Like, what actually is it? Because it's not an actual thing like, a database or an app. It's more of a method of transferring data between different sources. So I like to think of it like a language. Like, the language itself is not the valuable thing. The valuable thing is the information that we are transferring through language. And it's kind of the same thing with an API. Maybe you have an app and you have a database. Now we want to transfer information from the database to display on the front end of our app. And the way we do that is through an API. So it's a way of transferring data from one component of your application to another. So one very common API is the Google Maps API, which I'm sure you've all heard of it. So Google have this extensive database of maps, which they've generated through a combination of satellite imagery, aerial photography, like in-person, on-foot photography. So they've spent a lot of time and effort creating this database, and we can all, we can go onto Google Maps and we can look up pretty much anywhere on this planet. Now, let's say you wanted to have an interactive map on your website. You wouldn't go out and, pay for a satellite to go and take pictures or, fly a plane with a camera on it just to be able to have a map on your website. No, you'd use the Google Maps API. So Google Maps provide public access to their map database through an API. Now remember, an API is just the method of transferring data. It's not actually a thing itself, so to speak. So if I wanted to display a map on my website, I could use the Google API and basically use their map data on my website without actually having to collect any of the data myself. So this is the power of an API. We can use data that doesn't belong to us, and in many cases this data would be hard to obtain or expensive to obtain. So a company can provide access to their data through an API. Now, a lot of websites have, interactive maps on their websites these days. And if you actually go and look along the bottom, you will probably see that it's actually either a Google or Bing map. So they're basically using the APIs from these, these large companies which can afford to send these satellites up and do the aerial photography. We can just use their data through the API. As well as pulling data from a database, an API can also allow you to upload your own data, edit data, or delete data in a database. Now, the exact things that you can do with a certain API depend on the restrictions that have been put on that API or how it's been designed. So for example, back to the Google example, they're not going to allow you to delete data in the Google Maps database. All they allow you to do is pull that data. So if you build your own API, you can set certain restrictions on what you want to allow people to do. So there are a few different ways of building APIs. I mentioned an API is basically a set of protocols which dictate how we transfer data. One of the main ones being REST. REST stands for Representational State Transfer. This is probably the most common way of building APIs, and it uses URLs and HTTP methods to define the API's interface. So to put it simply, REST allows you to transfer data in 4 main ways. So you have get, post, put, and delete. So get is a way of retrieving information, post is a way of sending information, put is a way of changing information, if you think about it in terms of you're changing a value in a database, and delete is a way of deleting information. So let's take YouTube as a simple example, because this is very well known. You can get information, so this is retrieved through an API. Let's say you go to the YouTube search bar, you search for 𝘄𝗶𝘁𝗵𝗁 channel, and you'll get the response you get is that web page showing the channel page. And then you've also got the post request. So a post request, let's say I'm uploading this video, I would then be posting this video into the YouTube database. So I'm uploading information. And let's say I wanted to edit a comment or edit something, that would be the put request. And then delete would be, again, deleting something from the YouTube database. So we as the users, we're just using the user interface for a lot of this, but we're interacting with the YouTube database through an API. And you probably didn't realize that, actually going on YouTube and searching for something to retrieve that web page back is actually done through an API. There are other protocols for designing APIs as well as REST, one of the other main ones being GraphQL. But I don't want to go too much into the nitty-gritty today. I just want to kind of get across that an API is just a way of transferring data. It's just like language, just like speaking. We're transferring data between different sources, different components. Okay, so I'm now going to show you an example of an API that we can use in bioinformatics. But before we go into this, I just want to explain that not only can we interact with a database through an API through a user interface, so for example YouTube, we can also use an API to interact with a database through code. So now I'm going to show you a quick example of how we can use an API in our code in a bioinformatics setting.
Here we're going to use the UniProt API to pull some information about a certain protein. So we're going to go through this quickly line by line and I'll explain what's happening. So to start with, we just load in some packages which are required for 1, scraping web pages, and then 2, parsing the output that we're going to get. Then we're setting a certain UniProt ID. So this is just a random one which I've chosen. So we can see the protein name, the gene names, and then we've got all sorts of information like the function, names and taxonomy, subcellular location, etc., including like the sequence information. So what we're going to try and do is pull the sequence of this protein using the UniProt API. So the next thing we do is define a URL. So I'm just going to copy and paste this into the console, see what prints out. Okay, so we get this URL. So UniProt is a REST API, and as I mentioned, REST APIs use the HTTP protocol. Next, we use the requests package to get the URL. So remember, we have these 4 different things we can do with REST APIs. We can get, post, put, and delete, but here we're going to get the URL, and then we're going to pass a response, and we're going to extract information from the response. So I'm just going to quickly paste this in here. And then we can actually print some of the output we got. So we're going to print the accession, protein name, and sequence. So if I just expand this a little, yeah, so here we see, just using this URL, we've managed to get the protein name and the sequence.
Okay, so that's it for the video. So thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one.